So in this last video of session 4 on interviewing, I want to talk a little bit about some just handy kind of things to think about as far as how you answer questions. I mentioned earlier that a fair amount of questions may be behaviorally based. They'll often sound something like, tell me about a time, and they'll then want you to basically describe kind of what's going on. And what those questions are is behavioral based questions are made to be answered with the STAR method. They want you to describe the situation, then focus on the task that you were assigned, what actions you took, and what were the results. So again, as you prepare for the interview, you want to review your resume and personal statement, and you want to be prepared for questions you're likely to be asked, and that's part of what we're trying to do in this set of videos. But when you're asked a behavioral question, get used to kind of thinking of it in terms of STAR. You're first going to describe the situation. Was it a group project? Was it an undergraduate class? Was it social psychology? Was it an advanced class? Were you assigned into a group? Were you given an autonomous project? Were you working on your honors thesis? And what was the task? What were you trying to get done? Once you've described it, you should talk about the actions you took in a positive light. In other words, what actions did you do that made the situation better or allowed you to complete the task? And what were the results? How was the task completed and what kind of feedback did you get? So again, just kind of practice the STAR method. And this is another thing you can do with dry runs with either faculty members. The Kimmel Research Institute actually in our Student Center has opportunities, I believe, to do test interviews or just interviewing with fellow undergraduates that are also in the process. Do dry runs and get a kind of a feel for answering these questions using the STAR technique. You also, again, like I said, want to make sure that you have your own questions, and those questions should be somewhat tailored for each program, or potentially even the person that you're interviewing with. I will tell you that I'm not immune to the process. I have had students that have interviewed with me that have specifically read one of my more recent papers and have asked questions about it. And once again, that got me talking. That got me talking about my research. And looking back, I probably spent more time talking than they did, but I left that interview really thinking the student had done their homework and that I really liked that student because they had shown interest in my research. So again, we already kind of addressed this again. How do you handle questions about weakness? And I do think it's worth giving a lot of time to thought beforehand. Talk about what you've been doing to improve and be honest, but resist the urge to be confessional. And this kind of goes hand in hand with what we talked about, avoiding being too revealing or too personal in your personal statement. Same thing with your answers to these interviews. You want to make sure that you're presenting the image of a professional, serious, devoted grad student in your interviews. So questions you can ask about their mentoring model, how they're assigning mentors, if that program assigns mentors. You may want to ask about how students are evaluated above and beyond classes. You may want to ask about assistantships. Now, a note about assistantships. Some programs are a little antsy around this one. I would say that if you're asking about assistantships, unless it is a make or break deal for you, I don't think the interview is when you should ask whether the assistantships are paid and include a tuition waiver. You can always gather that information by talking to graduate students, or honestly, and probably better, after the entire interview process is over, you can always reach out to the administrative assistants to get information on assistantships. What kind of questions you can ask is about what kind of assistantships are in this program that will help me in furthering my education. In other words, are there assistantships, for example, to do research, to do teaching, or whatever it is that you're trying to build a skill set for? You can always ask, especially if it's a phone interview and not an in-person open house where you may already have access to graduate students, for some contact information for various graduate students so that you can ask them questions about the program and their experiences. And if you do this, follow up. Do actually contact them and ask those questions. And again, remember to stay very professional in your interactions with them as well. And finally, research opportunities. So if you're interested in research or it's a research-focused program, definitely ask about how do graduate students get involved in more research and what kind of research is each faculty member doing. So let's talk a little bit about appearance. So how does the look influence of an employee's opinion? So this is from a study that was looking at appearance, and I really just kind of want to go over this, that when we're looking at strong influence, grooming, 70%. So again, you should be, this doesn't, let me back up for a second. This doesn't mean change who you are, but this does mean that you should probably present yourself in the best possible light. You should be well bathed, you should be cleaned, you should probably have recently had your hair done or a haircut. Non-traditional interview attire, 49% reported a strong influence. And I will honestly admit, when I have a series of interviews and everyone is basically in at least a tie, long sleeve shirts, or business attire, and one student comes in flip-flops and Bermuda shorts, it does make an impression, not a good one. Non-traditional hair color, slight influence, and I wouldn't worry about this too much, but if you were thinking of some shocking hair color, right before an interview is probably the wrong time to make that change. Body piercings, 43% said slight influence, 32%, and this is becoming more and more common. But again, if you have extreme or industrial piercings, if you can leave those behind for the interview, probably not a bad idea, especially if it's a program you're trying to impress. Just recognize also that the vast majority of professors, we're older, and we come from a time where that was a little less acceptable. Now, again, it depends on the program, it depends on the professors. But these are about making choices that are going to make it most likely, no matter who's interviewing you, to make sure that you've got a good opportunity. Now, in the current COVID environment, I'm not sure how much a handshake's important, but make sure that if there are handshakes involved, you have simply a good, firm handshake. It shouldn't be limp. It shouldn't be a struggle for dominance. It should simply be a quick grab and squeeze. And again, if you haven't practiced your handshake, this is something to do with fellow graduates or undergraduates applying. Obvious tattoos, and again, I would say that generally tattoos are becoming more and more acceptable. However, again, if you have a fairly excessive amount of tattooing that can be covered by professional attire, it's probably not a bad idea to do so. Again, unusual hairstyle, I'm not suggesting you change who you are, but if you have a fairly traditional hairstyle, deciding to try something new and innovative right before an interview is probably not a good idea. And even I'm going to have to go against myself here, but 3 to 19%, 19% slight influence, 3% beard, and generally speaking, what we're talking about there is an ungroomed beard or an ungroomed mustache. So all of these can have an effect. And one of the things you can kind of do to get a feel for this is look at the faculty in the program that you're applying to. And if you see that the faculty have a fair amount of body piercings and tattoos, then this is probably not as much to worry about. But if you're applying to a program where most of the faculty are over the age of 50s and none of them are showing these, that's probably the time to pull it in a little bit. Again, this isn't about changing who you are. This is about if the program really interests you and if the program is what you think you need to continue on in your career, do everything you can to make sure you get that offer. So admission committees, what they get is what you send them, GRE, GPA, CV, letters of recommendation, but it can also include what they can find, Facebook, MySpace, Google. Let's be honest, most people have access to all of these social media platforms in some form or another. Most of us now are used to doing searches on all sorts of objects and all sorts of things. Just recently, I was interested in an old movie I saw, and I spent 15 minutes going down a rabbit hole of Google as I was reading what happened to every single actor that was in that movie. That information is out there, and it's hard to ignore. So do recognize that there's at least a decent chance that some of the people, whether it's the faculty or maybe just the fellow graduate students that are in the program, they may do a Google search for you. So you want to make sure as best you can that what they find is positive. So if you're on the process of applying to graduate schools, I would check my security settings or basically what privacy settings on all of your social media pages and reduce as much as possible access for any searches. Now, most of these pages now have certain things that you cannot necessarily turn off, including a lot of times your profile pic. Change it to something semi-professional. So again, all you're wanting to communicate is when they look, if they do, they find that you've taken the steps to make it sure that you're not giving out a bunch of information and that what they're finding is fairly professional. The one thing that I would also suggest is that go ahead and make a professional LinkedIn site that basically mirrors your personal statements and your CV and talks about what a good graduate student you're hoping to be. So top 10 no's for an open account. So if you are searchable on the internet, be aware references to any kind of drug abuse, extremist or intolerant views on either far end of the political spectrum, criminal activities, evidence of excess alcohol consumption, inappropriate pictures, including nudity or near nudity, use of a lot of foul language or foul emojis, links to unsuitable websites or questionable websites, lewd or questionable jokes, silly email addresses, and membership in pointless or silly groups. All of those can be found if your accounts are open, and all of them can actually hurt your application if people search. Now, I'm not defending and saying that programs should be searching for this information. I'm saying it's out there and you should be aware of it, and you should at least take minor efforts to make sure that what they find is positive. And just remember that Google does not forget. Actually, Google can eventually forget. And in fact, there are some agencies that can help you bury stuff deeper into Google to where it's hard to find. This actually is a Google search that was done on me by one of the other professors when we first put together this boot camp about 10 years ago. I'm glad to say you have to now go way deep into Google to find what they found, but for the most part, I'm pretty happy with most of this. Most of this is about my research, and most of this is about various things that I've done and book reviews, and then there's that PDF, Bringing Sexy Back. And if you clicked on that, you would find a story about me doing suicide drag. So this is Dr. Nadler. Joel Nadler, a statistics and psychology teacher, adjusts his wig after being put into makeup. So basically, I was at a campus-sponsored drag show, and they did what was called suicide drag, where they randomly chose someone from the audience to have to come up, have the drag performers make them up, put them in a dress, and then I had to go onto stage and, well, do a performance. So again, just recognize that what you do and your presence on social media can come back to haunt you a little bit. It may be seen as a positive, it may be seen as a negative, again, depending who's actually viewing that application. By the way, the drag performers did inform me that I make a horrible woman. So I'm not sure what to do with that, but that's a little bit of my own self-esteem that I've now lived with for over 10 years. So let's just talk briefly about a senior timeline. So this is going into that semester. We were talking about the fall semester is when you're applying. Let's talk about that spring semester when those interviews are happening, those campus visits are happening, and you're starting to wait to find out, did you get some offers? Did you get some acceptances? Again, a timeline, early January, again, before the actual due dates of any actual applications, make sure you call or email to confirm the receipt of all your materials. If there's any remaining applications that need to be sent out, definitely send them out. And this is the time to start really preparing for that interview, doing dry runs, working on your interview skills. You also potentially during this time, especially if you've already done a phone interview, may want to be getting current students' contact information so that you can reach out to those students to find out what their experiences with the program are like. Most decisions for most graduate programs are going to initially be made between March 1st and April 1st. And just recognize that just because you do not get an initial offer does not necessarily mean you're going to be rejected. Most programs operate on a kind of a three-tier system: acceptances, wait lists, and rejections. So rejections and acceptances will usually happen between March 1st and April 1st. So that's happening all through March. But if you get neither, that means most likely you're waitlisted. You did not get an initial offer, but recognize that not everyone that gets an offer accepts that offer. So you are still in play. Accepting and declining. So if you get an offer, basically, again, you can either accept, and I just kind of talked about this, you can get an acceptance, you can get a wait list, and a wait list often they may not tell you, or you get rejected. As you get offers, especially if you get multiple offers, you should probably compare each pair, holding off your choice, but informing your rejection. So basically what you are wanting to do is if you have two offers and you know one of them is an offer you would take over the other, you should let the other one know that you're declining their offer, you're rejecting it. Know for a fact that for the most part, if you get an offer, it's not going to be pulled back from you. So what I'm kind of communicating here is that if you already have an offer from a higher rated school that you know you'd prefer, and then you get another acceptance from a school that now you wouldn't go to because you have that first acceptance that's a better offer for you, let that other school know. Because if you hold on to that acceptance, you're also holding off from someone on that wait list from getting an offer. Now, if you're having to choose, you can always contact alternate schools for more details, ask them for, again, gather the information you need. Once you have acceptances, it's now a little bit more acceptable for you to be asking questions. Once you decide on which program you're going to accept, you should accept both by phone or in writing, and a lot of them will actually have a form or even a contract for you to sign. Be very courteous throughout the entire process to both programs that you accept or reject. Now, most APA accredited programs and any offer that actually has an assistantship attached to it, you have until April 15th before you have to say yes or no. Now, that doesn't mean every program is going to follow this guideline, but it is a pretty solid guideline. So a lot of programs, when they give you an acceptance, we've accepted into your program and we'd like to hear back in the next 2 to 3 weeks. You can always respond and go, I'm very gracious that you have made this offer. I am seriously considering accepting. I really do think this is going to be a great school for me. However, I still have applications out that I'm waiting to hear back so that I can make an informed decision. And can I have until April 15th to make my decision? That also means that right after April 15th is when a lot more offers are going to come out on that wait list. Now, if you haven't got an offer by the end of April, you probably are not going to be getting one at that point. So if you are rejected, avoid depression and pessimism. One of the things you could potentially do is contact other programs, especially if you are applying to PhD programs, as some master's programs still may actually have openings available or may have a rolling enrollment. Now, again, I honestly think in most cases, if you had potential backup schools, you should have already applied to them. You can look at www.apa.org's graduate list to find, again, additional programs. But honestly, I would suggest if graduate school truly is what you think is in your future, if you're truly dedicated to it and it's what you need to do the career you want, I wouldn't accept a lesser master program that you were originally unwilling to apply to. I would take a year off. And during that year, I would work, but I would try to find work that applies to what I want to do as a career with that advanced degree. I want to keep adding to my CV. I might continue working in a research lab even though I'm no longer a student. I want to actually get some feedback. I would even contact programs and ask them, how could I improve my odds? What did I need to do to be a better applicant for next year? You may also need to create a new list of places to apply to, including lowering your bar a little bit, and you probably want to identify the weaknesses that kept you from getting in. I will say that it usually speaks very well of a student that reapplies to programs the next year, even the same programs. It shows passion and tenacity. But what it is, the one thing you want to avoid though, is applying with the exact same materials. So I can tell you from my own personal experience as someone that has been on admission committees for over 10 years, that when students reapply, they apply to our program and they get rejected, and they reapply a year later with a better CV, with more experiences, with more refined materials, with better letters of recommendation. It is hard not to let them in, honestly. It makes a very strong argument that this is what they want to do. But likewise, when someone reapplies to our program and I literally can look at last year's application materials and they just changed the dates, that speaks very poorly. That is probably, again, if they were rejected with these materials last year, they're probably going to be rejected with them this year.